Welcome to Warschau. My name is Dr. Frank Henkler-Stephani. I have been working as a scientist on nicotine and alternative products for many years. I'm here at the Global Forum on Nicotine, the best place in the world to talk about tobacco harm reduction and a very good place to meet the community and experts. I'm looking forward to interesting talks. Yes, hello, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be joined by Clive Bates, who is one of the most renowned expert on tobacco harm reduction. You have been Director of Action on Smoking on Health. You have advised Tony Blair as Prime Minister. And you are now Director of Counterfactual, which for a German audience is quite an unusual name. Maybe you could briefly explain why you choose this name for your consultancy.
Well, counterfactual is a sort of logical concept. It means what would happen in the absence of something that does happen. So in the case of vaping, for example, the counterfactual is what would happen in the absence of vaping, and actually there would be a lot more smoking. So counterfactuals are used to try and assess the impact of something, but they're often misunderstood and poorly appreciated. So I've named my consultancy after counterfactuals because they're a very interesting and useful concept.
Yes, and I think in Great Britain, both the government and the public early understood advantages of vaping, e-cigarettes. It was a supporting government. Do you think the wide public had understood the different relative risks now?
Well, the support in the UK for vaping and tobacco harm reduction goes back quite a long way. It goes back to right at the heart of government. Advisors to the Prime Minister, behavioural insights team advised the government that it was a good intervention. It was cost-free. People did it willingly with their own money and reduced their risk. It was in some ways a perfect preventative health intervention. There's a strong support for it amongst the academics who go back a long way in understanding that, people smoke for the nicotine but die from the tar. And there's all those academics that have that insight and therefore understand intuitively that if you can deliver nicotine to people who want it in a way that doesn't cause cancer, cardiovascular and respiratory disease, then you can make a big public health impact. And then the public health bodies, some of them got on board, the Royal College of Physicians, Action on Smoking and Health, and a few others. We then have a kind of consensus amongst the knowledgeable people. Unfortunately, all of these policies are open to populists and opportunists who can whip up a moral panic and can frighten people about something that's good. And now we're facing a backlash, unfortunately.
Yes. I know a new draft of the tobacco and vaping bill was drafted in May. Yeah. And you responded with a very excellent assessment. And you used the term misfire and backfire. Maybe you could explain what is meant with both these.
Okay. So the tobacco and vaping bill has got everybody very excited in the UK because it contains one of these end game measures, which is called the smoke-free generation, which you essentially say sales of tobacco will be banned to everybody born after the 1st of January 2009. In other words, essentially the age that you can sell it goes up by 1 year every year, and by 2030 it will be 21. By 2040 it will be 31, and so on. And then people have gone. Finally, we've dealt with smoking. That's what I call a misfire, because that's basically addressing smoking policy to people who either don't smoke, will never smoke, will vape instead, or before they're old enough to get sick from smoking, they will have switched to something like vaping or nicotine pouches, which are much less risky and they won't get sick.
That's because smoking prevalence among young people in Britain is very, very low and will remain low. So there is a smoke-free generation without further restrictive legislation.
That's correct. So what's happening, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, is that people are switching to these people who would use nicotine, whatever, are switching to these new products, vaping and pouches, snus sometimes, and are never smoking in the first place. So smoking has gone from their world. So if you imagine the flow of new uptake of nicotine users, they're not smoking, that's not a thing. And if they do smoke, they will almost certainly switch before they are age 40. And you imagine that the people who are born after 2009 will turn 40 when they are in 2049. The world will be so different by then. It's inconceivable that they will still be smoking. They will have switched to vaping, future vaping products, heated tobacco products. And they will not get ill because the illness is caused by smoking. And if you stop smoking before the age of 40, you don't really get sick. So that's the misfire.
Yes.
The backfire is that the bill contains a bunch of anti-vaping measures. Now, vaping is the solution to smoking for most people who already smoke. And also for people who would use nicotine or vaping in pouches. And the danger is that in putting restraints on those, maybe restricting flavors, increasing taxes, imposing plain packaging rules, making it more difficult to buy or try the products, changing the formulation of the products. The danger is you only need a tiny, tiny change in smoking for the benefits, any benefits you get from vaping to be completely wiped out. And that's because more or less, smoking is 20 times as dangerous, many times as dangerous as vaping. So tiny increases in smoking caused by anti-vaping measures dominate the harms caused or dominate the effects of these anti-vaping measures. And therefore we're calling that a backfire.
Yes.
You think you're doing something positive, but actually the unintended consequences are so serious that they cause more harm than good.
Yes, I understand. And in fact, juvenile adolescent vaping is one very big issue in Germany as well. So there's a polarized discussion about raising numbers, and people are now requesting prohibition of flavor, comprehensive flavor prohibitions, prohibition of menthol. And how relevant do you think is the problem from a rational perspective? Can you estimate the relevance of juvenile smoking? I know it's a very important problem, but I think it also needs to be put in perspective.
Well,
and
Germany has by European standards, has very high rates of smoking.
Yes.
Vaping and frankly pouches and other non-combustible, non-smoke-free ways of taking nicotine are a solution to that problem. Now, the problem with the people who want to ban flavors is they won't get what they think they're going to get. There'll be three reactions to that, because all vaping products are flavored. Some of them are flavored with tobacco, some of them flavored with menthol, some with fruit, some with candy, whole range of flavors. But it's the flavors that people find interesting. So if you make them less attractive, or you only allow one flavor like tobacco flavor for some reason arbitrarily, then you'll get three effects. The first is that you'll have behavior change effects. Either people won't switch from smoking to vaping, they'll relapse from vaping back to smoking, or they won't be diverted as teenagers away from smoking and into vaping. So you'll get more smoking. The second thing you'll get is more illicit trade. People will be able to source flavored liquids. They're easy to make. They're easy to ship across borders. You can buy them on the internet. So we will see illicit trade, and that brings risks of its own. There's no consumer protection. There's no redress. There's no quality control necessarily. And then thirdly, you will see workarounds. So adults who want flavors will mix their own. They can mix their own. They can buy flavor ingredients. They can buy the core ingredients like propylene glycol, and then they mix their own and then use their own. Or you'll see informal markets developing in which somebody mixes a whole load of liquid and then sells it to their friends or their work colleagues or whatever. That has dangers of its own. People will do the mixing in unhygienic circumstances. They may mix in additives that they shouldn't mix in, oil-based flavorings. They'll maybe aromatherapy flavorings and things like that.
Course.
So people will start to do mad things. If you don't provide a lawful, responsible, proportionately regulated market in the things that people want, they will find a way around it. And all the ways around it that they find will do more harm than good. And that's the problem with the flavor banners.
Yeah.
They have to take into account unintended consequences. More smoking, more illicit trade, and more workarounds.
But if you would try to put adolescent smoking into a perspective of public health, because it's also a trade-off. Of course, you have attractive products for adult smokers, but you have the risk that young people who never smoked try to take up e-cigarettes. So you have to balance it out. And how would you consider juvenile smoking in such an overall assessment? You have a very nice picture and figure in your latest report. I think it was a very enlightening presentation.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. There will be young people who never smoke who take up vaping or pouches. Okay, the question gets back to the counterfactual. What would they do in the absence of vaping or pouches? And the people who you would be concerned about would be the kids who would otherwise smoke. If these products weren't available, they would go on to become smokers because their parents smoke, because people around them smoke, and also because there are a large number of risk factors associated with smoking, psychosocial things to do with, their mental health, their prospects, their delinquency, those sort of things. Those are the things that drive nicotine uptake, not the availability of vapes or fancy packaging or anything like that. The second thing to get is to understand is the relative size of the adult market for nicotine and the young person's market for nicotine. Okay, it's totally dominated by adults. So in the UK, you have roughly, if you take the total of people who are smoking and vaping or doing both, you have about 18 times as many adults doing that as you have young people. Yet nearly all the focus is concentrated, all the public concern and focus is channeled into the small number of young people who are vaping. Vaping isn't that dangerous. It isn't that persistent for many young people. Many young people will experiment with it, and the people who persist with it are almost certainly going to be the people who would have otherwise been smokers, and for them it's beneficial. So you have with the young people, you have a small number of people involved. Most of what they're doing with vaping is of little consequence in public health terms. It's experimental. They'll stop fairly soon. There's no need to worry about it. Kids do things like that. They experiment with things. For the people who are using it more intensively and more permanently, they are the kids who would otherwise have been smokers. And for them, the vaping is beneficial. So you have to get that in context and then look where the public health problem is. It's in the UK, it's the 6 million people who are already smoking or smoking and vaping. And the challenge is to get them to move from smoking over to vaping or exclusive vaping use. That's what you're really trying to achieve from a public health point of view. That's where all the public health gains are. And if you make vaping more difficult or a worse experience because you're trying to protect youth, then you're going to get a cost in terms of the benefits to adults.
Do you have hopes that the new government or after the election, the bill will be reconsidered?
There's a lot of commitment behind the existing bill, and it gets a lot of public praise and applause. A lot of the public health people are behind it, but possibly it will start to sink in what a bad measure it really is.
My last question concerns WHO, which is really one of the biggest impediments for tobacco harm reduction, because I think they are quite predetermined not to support it, and since they have no advice governments to be anti-vaping, I think it's very difficult for them to change attitude. But nothing moved at the latest COP. Do you think the conflict is frozen now, or do we need to expect further activities?
Look, I was involved in and a big supporter of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and WHO playing a role in this. when it was conceptualized in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the idea is that we would take evidence-based measures that work to reduce smoking, so advertising bans, smoking restrictions, taxation, information campaigns and all that. And we would get those out of just Europe, North America, Australasia, and that we would try to generalize that to the developing countries, lower medium income countries, and that would be a really good policy. We'd actually get a public health win from that. Unfortunately, WHO has entered what is a controversial debate about tobacco harm reduction and has put itself firmly on one side. It's been captured by one side of the argument. It's been paid a lot of money from the Bloomberg Philanthropies Foundation, which is very hostile to tobacco harm reduction. And unsurprisingly, it is coming out with hostility to that measure when it should be supportive or at least even-handed about it. Now, I think that what's happening is that the members of the FCTC, the parties, are seeing it and feeling that, well, actually, we're being pushed too far here. You're not respecting us. You're not playing straight with the science. And I think WHO has to be really careful that it doesn't suffer a major hemorrhage of trust amongst the parties for the way it's doing. It's going to really some extreme lengths now with misinformation about vaping and so on, misunderstandings about nicotine, unsophisticated understanding of youth vaping and so on. And it's trying to play like a non-governmental activist organization instead of a responsible intergovernmental organization. And I tell you, it cannot do that for much longer. If it does, it will lose trust on pandemics. It will lose trust on its role in dealing with serious disease in developing countries. Basically, it will no longer be a trusted organization. Its leadership will be cleared out and something else will have to be done.
Oh, that's a very interesting perspective.
I think that will happen.
If you, coming back to tobacco harm reduction, are you still an optimist that things will move?
I am an optimist that the fundamentals will move in the right direction, basically because there is a strong demand for nicotine, whether we like that or not. People like it, makes them feel better, makes them function better, and so on. So there's a strong demand. The consumers will insist, quite reasonably, that they have products that don't cause cancer, heart disease, and respiratory illnesses. They will insist that they get nicotine in a way. And if governments don't create legal markets for that, there will be illicit markets for that, okay? So it will happen. The question is, to what extent do WHO and other public health authorities, regulators like the European Commission, bodies like the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, to what extent do they slow down the transition of the nicotine market from high risk to low risk products, okay? And that, I'm afraid, is quite depressing. It will happen. The question is how quickly.
Okay. Thank you very much for the interview. It was a great pleasure. We have learned quite a lot. And
thank you.
I hope that we have further opportunities to discuss at the meeting.
Okay.
And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Talk
It's
to
a
you
pleasure.
again, I hope.
Pleasure. Great questions as well. Thanks.